Hello chess friends and welcome to the Art of Chess channel and welcome back to the FIDE Candidates in 2022. So we're following now the round 8 and of course the most important game from this round was the American Derby between Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana. Before we analyze this game, we have to also mention a very important game from this round between Liren and Jan Nepomniachtchi, in which they played a draw, which means now for the outcome of the Superman that if now Hikaru Nakamura wins his game here against Fabi, that he could be only half of the point behind Fabiano Caruana and the 1.5 points behind Jan Nepomniachtchi. But if Fabiano Caruana wins his game here against Hikaru, then he could equalize, of course, the result with Jan Nepomniachtchi. Then it will be really wild and epic battle between the two of them. But here Hikaru has, as I said, really the opportunity to spice up some things and maybe complicate things in the continuation, because so far it was a pure domination by Fabi and the Nepo, but now Hikaru can catch up and maybe has also then afterwards good chances in the continuation of the Superfan. So let's see now what happened. In my opinion, it was a beautiful open Ruy Lopez game between the two of them with really wild tactical ideas be prepared. This was one of the best games so far in this Superfan. So here Hikaru opened with the move e4. Fabi's response was e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. We have now the Ruy Lopez on the board. So a6, the Murphy defense was played by Fabiano. We have bishop to a4, knight to f6, and after kingside castling we have knight takes e4, which becomes now of course the open Ruy Lopez. And okay, when you take out the pawn on e4, you have to be careful about some tactical ideas on the e file, so that's why the main line is immediately to play the move d4, opening the center, and that's why here first of all bishop b5, kicking away the bishop to b3, and here d5 is of course locking now a little bit the e file, because now the knight is protected, so no rook to e1 ideas are working, so at least they're not dangerous. So after move d5 we have here d takes e5, we have bishop to e6. Here Fabiano protects of course the pawn on d5 and keeps now the position really glued together, keeps now really a compact position in the center of the board. So we have now the move c3, bishop to c5, and here after move knight to d2, this becomes now the so-called St. Petersburg variation of the Ruy Lopez, of the open Ruy Lopez. And after move kingside castling, we have now bishop to c2, attacking the knight, and now Fabi played really one of the most aggressive ideas here. Fabi played a very nice tactical shot, knight takes f2, and this is now the so-called Dilworth variation of the Ruy Lopez, and it's playable. There are many games in the database in this particular line. This is not a mistake by black. Many times it would be a mistake if you give up maybe two minor pieces for the rook in an early stage of the game, but in this line there are many even winning games with the black pieces. There is a beautiful game between Vili Santos Gurati in which he destroyed Alireza Firouzja in this line with the black pieces, but there is also a game between Magnus Carlsen against Shak Mamedjarov in which Magnus destroyed Shak here in this line with the white pieces. So it's, I think, a double-edged opening line which is playable for both sides. But I really liked here Fabi's choice in which he showed that basically he's trying to get the win here. That's, I think, the most important thing to say, because Fabi is saying I really have to make something out of this position. So in the continuation we have rook takes f2 here by Hikaru Nakamura, bishop to f2, king takes f2, and now you can see the king gets decoyed to the f file where already the rook is, so that's why now the main line of this variation is now the move f6. And what we're hoping for is of course to open the f file. What you have to do here from black's perspective is maybe to take out e takes f6, or to immediately step back with the king and allow your opponent here to take out the pawn on e5. So here in the continuation knight to f1 was played by Hikaru Nakamura. There is of course also this line e takes f6 could be a possibility, but I think the downside about this line for white is that basically the queen is getting invited into the game. The queen comes now into the game with the tempo. Now we have also beautiful battery. Knight to e5 could be working. For instance, you step back here with the move king to g1, but still with rook to e8 black is building a beautiful attacking formation. Maybe you can again play knight to f1, a good defensive move, but now look at this, knight to e5, very, very unpleasant. Then knight to f3 is queen takes queen to f2 is also a serious threat. So as I said, you can be the judge of this position. Of course, this is protectable with bishop to e3, but I kind of don't like now this line for white. In my opinion, black is activating too many pieces and has now, I think, a beautiful aggressive play. So that's why knight to f1 here by Hikaru Nakamura. So he didn't play e takes f6. He didn't allow the queen to come out with the tempo. So of course Fabi accepts the challenge now, f takes e5. So when we watch now the pawns, Fabi has now 7 pawns on the board. Hikaru Nakamura has only 5 pawns on the board, but has of course 2 minor pieces for the rook. This is now a very dynamic center. You have to now step back with the king because e4 is also a serious threat. So that's why king to g1. Now we have queen to d6 and now bishop to e3. So Hikaru Nakamura has of course to include now all of the minor pieces into the game in order to make something out of it. So now comes one of the critical moments, I think, of the game. Nothing dramatically can change, I think, so far for both sides, but you have now basically many choices here from black's perspective. You can play bishop to f5. That's the move that Fabiano Caruana played. You can play, of course, rook from a to e8, again activating all the pieces, and you can also play here something like rook from a to d8, or you can play maybe h6. But there is a very interesting line here with the move e4. E4 is very, very aggressive because now knight to g5 could happen, and now you have this square for the knight. You have then afterwards some ideas of knight to d3, maybe also knight to f3 in some occasions could be a nice tactical shot. Now for instance bishop to e4 could happen. This would be a really, really wild line. I think it's a must-know line about this open Ruy Lopez game. Look at this, bishop to e4 is actually possible because d takes e4 could happen, and now if it takes queen to d6, c takes d6, look at this also, the bishop is hanging on d6. So that's why after move bishop to f5, look how really dynamic this position can become. Rook takes f1 is now the opportunity, because if queen to f1 happens, now of course we can take, and now there is no risk of queen takes d6 followed with knight to e6. So that's why you have to take out now with the king to f1, but actually here d takes e4 is actually working because queen takes d6 is not now the same tactical shot, because you have this intermediate bishop to c4, you get delivering a check, and now you see the bishop is not hanging anymore on e6. So then of course in the continuation king to g1 we can take, white can also take out the pawn on e4, and here maybe with d5 we can fix everything, and this should probably be a drawish position. I think Fabiano maybe could have gone into this line, maybe he was familiar with this tactical shot. So let's go back after move bishop to e3 to play here the move e4, knight to g5, and here with knight to e5 here bishop to e4, as we said, could be really, really wild idea. But Fabi tried to spice up some things, and he played now bishop to f5. If of course bishop to f5 happens, then again the rook comes very, very active into the game. Maybe you can attack the rook, but now with rook to f7, again rook to f8, we could build again a beautiful battery. Then again e4, then follow with knight to e5. This could be very, very dangerous, although this is probably a slightly better position for white, but I still think that black could complicate things, especially with the rook battery on the f-file. So that's why after move bishop to f5, Hikaru didn't want to play this line. He played the more solid line with bishop to b3, attacking simply the weakness on d5, and he's never allowing now maybe black to complicate things now with the move d4, because many times d4 could be a very, very nice breakthrough. For instance, you play rook to d8, then d4, so that's why bishop to b3 is not allowing the scenario immediately. So we have now rook from a to d8 by Fabiano Caruana. We have queen to e1, trying to sneak in with the queen here on g3, and now in the continuation we have knight to a5, attacking now the bishop on b3, and now queen to f2. Very, very important move by Hikaru Nakamura. The serious threat is of course here the move bishop to c5. If you take now, this wasn't played in the game, knight takes b3, in my opinion it's not good here for black. A takes b3, look at this pawn is weak, always a backward pawn. Bishop to c5 is still a serious threat. So this is, I think, something that black should try to avoid. So that's why after move queen to f2, Fabi played a beautiful knight to b7, not allowing some ideas of bishop to c5, and here he said I think here equalize the position. I think this is playable for both sides. So in the continuation we have now rook to e1, and this is a very, very tricky move. we have to say it, because now the rook on e1 is actually attacking the pawn on e5. And here in the continuation, Fabi makes, I think, also immediately a mistake. He plays now c5. This move could have been punished immediately by Hikaru Nakamura if he would have played the move bishop to g5. Unfortunately for Hikaru, he didn't play this move, because look at this, bishop to g5 is very complicated already for black. Unfortunately, as we said, Hikaru missed this. I'm not sure why. Bishop to g5, really, it will be a beautiful move. Look at this. If you play c4, the rook is hanging. If you try to protect your pawn on e5 here, then we have this one. Rook to e5 actually is working. Look at this. Bishop to e5. You can maybe play something like bishop to e4, but still we can take. And here, if you play something like, I don't know, queen to g6, still we can cover ourselves here with the move knight to g3. For instance, if you try in this position to maybe complicate things with rook to e8, then of course knight takes e4, rook to e4, queen to g3 is simply winning the game. So this was really wild tactic that Hikaru missed. After move c5, here instead of this move c5, Fabi should have simply protected the pawn on e8. And there is, I think, even the game in the database, I see at least one game in the database, it's in an international master level, where rook to e8 has been played in this position. Unfortunately here Fabiano Caruana played really inaccurate move. c5 was simply too slow. The e5 weakness is now crucial, but here Hikaru Nakamura didn't react correctly. He played now knight to g3, and actually here Fabiano Caruana is taking over. So you had your chance with this idea bishop to g5. Now in the continuation we have bishop to d3, simply activating the bishop. We have queen to d2, attacking now the bishop on d3. And again, Fabiano makes, I think, a slight inaccuracy. He plays now the move c4, and this is not good. Actually, the better line is here the move e4, because now the knight has to step back. That's now the main issue here. Look at this, the knight has to play to h4, and now with queen to e5, the problem is now you're controlling both of these knights, so these knights are out of game. For instance, you can play bishop to f2, we can still activate our rooks, and now after move bishop to d1, the problem, I think, here for white is that black can now create really pawn storm here on the queen side. You can maybe try bishop to f5 to occupy bishop to g4, pardon me, to occupy maybe the f5 square, but now with g6 everything is compact here, so the knights are out of game, the bishop is out of game, this bishop is also not so good. Although white has here 4 minor pieces on the board, they're out of game, and that was, I think, the beautiful idea here with the move e4. You're kicking away the knight, but now with the move c4, look at this, so the knight is not attacked anymore, and you cannot play e4 anymore. If you play now e4 afterwards, then you see the pawn is not on c5 anymore. Now knight to d4 can create, of course, a beautiful blockade around the square. So that's why c4 maybe a slightly inaccurate move here by Fabiano Caruana. Of course, it's not losing because you're playing c4, but he should have kept attention with the move e4. So here bishop to d1, we have rook to d7, bishop to f2. Simply Hikaru is trying to keep this position solid. He's trying, of course, to play a slow game, activating the pieces on the best square. And here in the continuation, we have rook to f7. Finally, Fabi is building a very powerful rook battery. Notice that there are many tactical threats around the square f1. If something gets cleared, then of course always rook to f1 is a threat. Of course, for instance, if the knight moves somewhere, if the f file clears, then of course you could face many problems on the back rank. So in the continuation, we have knight to h1 here by Hikaru Nakamura, because also a threat is of course e4. If you play something like knight to d4, then also the bishop on f2 is hanging. So that's why knight to h1, protecting simply the bishop on f2. We have e4, and now knight to d4. As we said, imagine this position, we play e4, but we without playing the move c4. Now this move knight to d4, as I said in the beginning, wouldn't be possible. That was the slight inaccuracy by Fabi. Now e4 creates, of course, this beautiful square for the knight, and basically here Hikaru Nakamura has a compact position in the central board. The dark bishop is controlling the d4 square, so it's now a pleasant game again here for white. So in the continuation, Fabi makes this move, queen to g6. This was really unnecessary. Maybe knight to c5, again bringing the piece into the game, maybe queen to e3, and now we're simply, from black's perspective, attacking now the centralized knight. That was maybe one way to go, but here Fabi, after move queen to g6 and here h4, basically basically Fabi allowed here Hikaru Nakamura to get some spaces here, and especially now h5 is also a threat to simply expand here on the king side. What you could do maybe is here h5, just stop this progress, but still then you're weakening a little bit your king side here. But what Fabi did was actually much worse, and this was, I think, now really the critical moment of this game. Here Fabi played knight to c5, and this was simply one tempo too slow. In the previous move, knight to c5 could be working, but look at this now. With h5, Hikaru Nakamura gets an extra tempo. We have queen to d6, and now the bishop comes very active into the game. Now this idea knight to e6 to trade off the knights is not working anymore. In the previous line it could work, but now it's simply too slow. Now basically Hikaru Nakamura is controlling all the center of the board, so it's now again a dominant position here for white because of this knight to c5 mistake by Fabi. So here h6, Fabi stops again this potential progress of white here with the move h6. We have queen to e3, and Fabi, we have to say it was already low on clock. He was around 15 minutes here. He had to play really fast his moves because, you know, he had to reach move 40 in order to get some additional time. He was now on move 30, so it was still a complicated position where you could make many inaccuracies, mistakes or blunders. So that's why Fabi tried to play a simplified line with queen to f4, simply trading off more pieces, hoping for the best. We have queen to f4, rook to f4, and now knight to e6. Beautiful move here by Hikaru Nakamura. This is again a simplification line for white, but now you look at this. After move knight to e6, bishop to e6, the bishop is coming very active into the game, and notice many pawns are now on light squares, and you have this light square bishop on d3, but the bishop is simply out of game. So now white has here really a beautiful position. So this should be much better here for Hikaru. So in the continuation we have king to h7, bishop to d5 here by Hikaru Nakamura. So finally he grabs now a very important pawn. We have rook to f5, bishop to c6, rook takes h5. Here, okay, Hikaru lost also his pawn, but look at this now. This bishop is very powerful. It's controlling now really the center of the board. It's creating also beautiful blockade. Never ever e3 is going to happen. So of course black would love to push the pawn on e3 and then create further dynamics, maybe e2 and similar ideas, than rook to f1, but this is not possible. As we said, white is simply controlling the whole board. So in the continuation, after bishop to d4, we have rook to f5, knight to f2, attacking now the e4 weakness, and now rook to f7. So we're now in move 37 here. Fabi had around 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock, which was really wild. So he had to still play 3 more moves in order to get some additional time, in order to get the extra hour. So now he had to really play fast moves. So we can expect that he will not play simply the best moves. So that's why here Hikaru played, I think, a little bit fast. He didn't play maybe the best suggested top engine moves, but he's keeping the advantage here with the move b4. And now Fabi makes, I think, a new mistake with the move h5. And the line that you have to see is really wild. It's so complicated, and of course, as I said, Fabi was around 1 minute on the clock, so this was simply not enough time to calculate everything. But there is really a wild line that could maybe help out black. Still, we have to say white is much better, but maybe this was slightly better to move e3, and e3 is pretty wild. Of course, if you take here with the rook to e3, then the knight is hanging on f2, so we have cut off here the connection between the bishop and the knight. If you take out now with the bishop, then rook to e7 could at least simplify the game. You take out the rook, but also we take out this one, and this is now again an equal game. So okay, white doesn't have to necessarily go into this line, but at least you're spicing up some things, and you're not advancing some pawns. So your pawn structure here on the king side is still fixed. So but what Fabi did, as we said, after move b4, he played h5, and this pawn is weak now. There are now many things that Hikaru could have played. You can play bishop to e8, it's perfectly fine, attacking the pawn on h5. You can even take out bishop to e4 immediately. This is also, I think, winning, but Hikaru pulled off also a very good move. So these are 3 best moves, so one of them is really great for sure. sure. So the a4 is simply good enough here for this position. Still the evaluation is much better here for white. So now we move 39. So here b takes a4 was played by Fabiano Caruana. We have bishop takes a4, and now finally with the move h4, here Fabiano Caruana has reached time control. He has now an additional hour on the clock. And again, h4 is okay. You're expanding here on the king side, but it's simply, I think, again, weakening your pawn structure. Now look at this. This pawn is weak on a6. This pawn is on c4 is weak. Again, Hikaru can play, of course, some normal ideas with bishop to c6, simply attacking the pawn on e4. From this point on, white has really a dominant position all over the board. So after h4, here Hikaru continued with bishop to e3. You can also play, of course, bishop to c6, just continue the pressure against these weaknesses, against the pawn on e4. Then afterwards, you want to, of course, also attack this pawn. You can then afterwards maybe play rook to e1, rook to a1, attacking now further. And as I said, this should be, again, a beautiful continuation for Hikaru. Bishop to e3 is also good, attacking simply the rook. Here, Fabi simply retreated to f5, and now rook to a1 with the same idea, just pressuring the pawn on a6. Now we have h3, and this was quite an annoying move here for Hikaru to handle, because there is a problem. You cannot take with the g pawn if g takes h3. So here Fabi really used his only resources. He tried up to really complicate things in some ways, just to force a draw or something. Here if you take g takes h3, this was really a beautiful idea by Fabi. Then of course rook to f3, attacking simply the bishop. You can maybe protect the bishop with rook to e1, but look at this, rook to g3 is coming. There is even this idea of rook to e3, rook takes e3, rook takes f2. You have to be careful, of course. White doesn't have to be really careless here. No, Hikaru doesn't have to pair necessarily this line, but as I said, this was really a beautiful surprise element by Fabi. But after move h3, Hikaru found a beautiful way how to get out of this mess. He played rook to a2, allowed now here Fabi to take h takes g2, but now he brought the bishop into the game. Look at this, the bishop is coming here. Then of course we're cutting off some potential protections on the g file. Still, this is a weakness, so this pawn can be taken afterwards, so it's not a huge problem. So rook to f6 by Fabi, protecting his very important pawn on a6. Here we have bishop to g4, an attack against the rook, rook to d5, and now king takes g2. Rook to g6 attacks the bishop, and now king to g3. You don't have support because the bishop is of course controlling this very important square on g5. Also bishop to e2 is not working. The rook, at this how important this move rook to a2 was by Hikaru Nakamura. So the game is still so tactically rich. You have to be careful. The rooks are very active by Fabiano Caruana, but I think the main strategic goal here for Hikaru is somehow to grab this pawn. If this pawn falls, then I think it's completely winning, especially because then here Fabi could have problems with the pass pawn on the b file. So in the continuation, we have bishop to f1 by Fabi. We have bishop to d4, again playing a beautiful blockade around the square d4. We have bishop to d3. Fabi plays perpetuals, is hoping, as we said, for a draw. I think he will be very satisfied with this draw outcome. So king to f4, Hikaru plays actively with the king, king to g8, bishop to f5, rook to h6, and now knight to g4, also including now the knight into the game. So here Hikaru played really the best stockfish moves in the continuation. So we have rook from h to d6, simply continuing now to keep the position glued together, to keep the position compact, and now knight to e3, attacking the rook, rook to b5, the only square now for the rook, and now bishop to c5, again attack against the rook. We have a rook to f6, and now king to e5. Really good moves here by Hikaru, including now also the king into the attack. So we have now king to f7, and now Hikaru made maybe a slight inaccuracy, really a necessary move. He played now the move knight to d5. In the beginning it seems so nothing special with this move, and this move is not losing for Hikaru, or it's not getting even better for Fabiano. Still here Hikaru has a much better position, but the problem is now this stunning tactic that Fabi pulled off. Rook takes f5. Here after move king to f5, here Fabi proceeded with a beautiful e3, discovered check, and continued simply to push this passer. So now the pass pawn is at least some kind of an idea here for Fabi to make some kind of a counterplay. So instead of this move knight to d5, a better idea is just to play solid rook to f2, then maybe after something like king to g8, getting out of this file, you can play bishop to e6, normal idea, so knight to f5, or you can even trade off rook takes f6, g takes f6, king takes f6, so nothing changes. Still we have this two beautiful pawns here on the queen side. We have still these three minor pieces on the board. We still have this beautiful blockade, so I'm not seeing good ways here for black. The evaluation is +4 here for white. So as I said, knight to d4, slightly inaccurate move. As I said, still Hikaru is much better when it comes to computer evaluations, when it comes to piece activity, but really unnecessary move. Here Fabi pull off this rook to f5, as we said, king takes f5, now e3, simply beautiful discovered attack, king to e5, and now here Fabi pushes the pawn on e2, and suddenly you see it's an unpleasant game. In the previous line Hikaru would have, I think, a completely winning game. Now he has to still struggle for the win. So here bishop to f2, not allowing a promotion on e1. Of course we have a rook to b8, and now maybe again a slightly inaccurate move here by Hikaru, and I'm a little bit sad that here Hikaru tried to flag, I think, Fabiano Caruana. Fabiano Caruana was always down on the clock, but he played really too fast here. A better idea, instead of this bishop to e1, which is of course hard to see, but here Hikaru could have simply taken the pawn on a6. Look at this, what happens. You can play, of course, rook to e8, then king to d4, maybe rook to e4, maybe this one. Even if you promote here to e1, it's not such a huge problem. Look at this, we just pushed the pawn. The cool part about this move is that we can only always play knight to b4, never ever allow this rook to compete here on the b file. Now we just push the pawns. If you go behind, we play knight to b4, we have also check, we can push the pawn further. So here the engine likes this line also. It's a winning continuation here for Hikaru, but bishop to e1 keeps, I think, a little bit more the white pieces passive. Okay, Hikaru still has an extra piece, but now look at this of Fabiano Caruana has now two annoying pass pawns, the e pawn, and now also the g pawn will be included in the game, because here after rook to e8, first to check, look at this, now g5. So Fabi pulled off here really the only moves in order to prolong the game. Still the evaluation is about +2 here for Hikaru, but these are really only moves that Fabi played. Now he's struggling, he's really battling for the draw. He wants to get at least half of the point out of this brutal game. So here of course you cannot take, if you take king takes g5, then of course you get rook to e5, the knight is hanging, so it's not good. After move g5 we have king to g3. Now Fabi has to protect, of course, the pawn on a6. As we said, if you lose the pawn, you will lose probably the game. But this is quite an annoying pawn. Also some ideas are working. Of course we want to play rook to f6. So far this move is not possible, but now then rook to f1 is also a huge threat, so Hikaru has to be careful about also this tactical ideas by Fabi. So king to f2, we have rook to h6, we have knight to e3. Here Hikaru realized that he could have some problems around the square f1, so that's why he included the knight into defense. We have rook to f6, we have king to g3, and look at this, what happens. For instance, if you play king to g1, then even you're losing the game. That's the beauty about this tactical shot around the square f1. You have to be really careful. Okay, Hikaru didn't fall for this, he played the accurate move, king to g3, but now Fabi pulled off rook to f1 anyway, and now a beautiful defensive move here by Hikaru, knight to g2, protecting, of course, here the bishop on e1. So that's why here again Fabi retreated again to f6, simply protecting here this pawn on a6, and here Hikaru Nakamura simply proceeded with the normal bishop to f2, where still he has control of the e1 square, and now he can maybe include also the rook into the game. So after bishop to f2, here Fabi played king to g6, of course, still protecting this a6 pawn, but now finally Hikaru can include the rook into the game, which is now very important. And the most important thing is he can finally go with the rook behind the pawn, which is the so-called Tarashlu, where you should of course go behind your enemy's pawn. So now it's again at least some kind of an idea. At least I think Hikaru had here a clear idea how to win this endgame. So we have rook to e6 again. Fabi is preventing rook to e5, but now knight to e1. attacking now the bishop on d3, but also creates, of course, this beautiful blockade here on the e file. So bishop to f5, knight to f3, we have rook to d6, and now knight to d4. Again, a beautiful square here for the knight. We have bishop to d3. You have to protect your pawn, and after rook to e5, again this pawn is hanging. So that's why here the only move for Fabiano Caruana was this one, to spice up somehow the game. But now after move knight to f3 in this position, Fabiano Caruana resigned. So why did he resign? Rook to e6 can be of course played, but now we play just rook to a5, and still this pawn is hanging. So in the next couple of moves we'll simply take it, or you can even take immediately here the rook on e6, king takes e6, knight to g5, maybe this one again, including now the knight, and still we're controlling the e1 square. We have always the opportunity to protect our pawns with the move bishop to d4. So this is a position ready to resign for black. So great game by Hikaru. I was really impressed by his calm way how he handled this bishop takes f2 idea in the beginning, how he realized that this pawn storm ideas by Fabiano Caruana in the beginning stage really stayed calm, and now he spiced up really the tournament. As we said, he's only half of the point behind Fabiano Caruana, and Fabi and Jan Nepomniachtchi still have to play. I think Hikaru would be satisfied if, for instance, Fabiano wins now the game against Jan Nepomniachtchi, then he would be half of the point behind him, and still he would have his game to play. So it's still unclear what's going to happen in the super event. I'm sure this will be one of the most epic tournaments in my life. So as I said, really great game. I'm not sure what to say. You see, it's all about preparation, it's all about tactics, it's all about staying calm in the game. I think here Hikaru shows really class, and he is now again one of the favorites to win this event. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas also of the Ruy Lopez, of the open Ruy Lopez, and then afterwards with some great endgame techniques. If you want to see more games from this event, check out my coverage so far with some more great games that we have seen before. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.